My talk is about how to design to disrupt, and I was asked to talk about design thinking in the way that we think about design thinking as a disruptive method. And so I went to an area that's very close to my heart. I'm a Vice President of Technology Strategy at Frog, so I work with clients on the strategy side of the house, working with our designers and our technologists and our program management and lots of other folks and our creative team at Frog, helping people create solutions, many of which are disruptive, either to companies' existing business or to markets and sectors they're going after. So what I did is I put together some stories that center around the Internet of Things and our experience with that most recently, and some principles that I think are important for companies to know. Fundamentally, we understand that the nature of user-centered design has changed. In the 20th century, a lot of the work that was done was where people could understand the intended uses of systems from the time that they're designed and created to when they're being used and extended and altered over time. And so what we've discovered, especially with the new sorts of technology and the new use cases, that a lot of these systems are, when they're out in the wild, are actually subject to interaction with unintended consequences, interaction with use that was well beyond the intention of the designers. And so this coincides with this idea that as the set of technologies, this coincides with the idea that as the Internet of Things takes off, a lot of the devices in the Internet of Things are out in the real world. And so the principles that I'm going to present tomorrow have a lot to do with that. Essentially, the idea is that the Internet of Things is a team sport. It's not something that can be done by one company by themselves. That a lot of the business case and the business value of the Internet of solutions for the Internet of Things actually have to do with making things less expensive, making things more, replacing existing solutions and existing tools. And so you have to be better, faster, cheaper, but oftentimes that's different than the way it actually comes down in the real world. So, so some of the things I'm going to be talking about are, for example, the idea is that you need to design for modular compatibility. You need to design for modules to fit together and for systems to be built out of building blocks that some of them come pre-assembled, some of them come from other vendors. If you're inventing, essentially, if you're creating a new component yourself, you're probably doing it wrong. In addition, I'm going to talk about the idea that if you're, as you're thinking about the solution you're putting in place, that you should think about the value chain and the service chain and how it sits in the world, and whether or not you can service the product or service that you're putting in place yourself, or whether it's something that you need to think about how you get the product maintained, how it works with other companies, etc. Similarly, one of the most scary things is this idea that remaking the industrial process and remaking products, we think means actually opening up and allowing end users and hackers to influence the design of solutions going forward. So one of the things I'm going to be saying is that, as scary as that sounds, that's actually that's an essential part of creating disruptive solutions. So being able to take the feedback from people, the solutions they're building, and actually work that into how you're designing products going forward is really important. This idea that oftentimes, so the example I'm going to be using is a smart garbage bin, a smart rubbish bin, and the idea that going forward, the way to make that most effective is to actually think of it as a composite of many different services put together from many different companies. The technology may be modular, but also the responsibility of the things that people are doing is also modular. There's public interfaces, from a technology perspective, but there's also different services provided by different parts of the value chain in a really dynamic way. It's not something that's done and designed at inside your four walls, and it always stays that way. It needs to apply differently to different circumstances, different localities, different countries, and you need to be able to do that in a way that's cost effective and that actually captures the value that you're trying to capture. Well, I think it depends. You know, we are always thinking from the perspective of the use value of a particular of the thing you're designing. So the question is whether you're making whether you're making the experience for the end customer or the maintainer or whoever's involved in interacting with the product or service. If you're making that better for them, it's often the intention of the people who create those things to have the business effect that they're going to disrupt a market, or they're going to change the way people work, or they're going to be a substitution for a different product. But we don't try to concern ourselves too much with that, because I think what if we were thinking about ways to disrupt a business model, we're really not paying attention to the end user. We're really not paying attention to, with Internet of Things and M2M. A lot of the touch is from people who are maintaining those systems, who are managing them, and we're not trying to think about how we are or are not disrupting them. At the same time, there should be people thinking about that. There should be people who are looking at the business value and what the business objectives and the strategic touch of what you're doing is. I think everybody falls in love with ideas like Airbnb or Uber or these startups that are taking what are probably inefficient and broken markets and finding ways to provide better value to the end customer at the expense of all sorts of ugly things that happen in the background. Is Uber really treating cab companies correctly? Is the customer really getting good value? They perceive that they are, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's a lot of attention to those business to consumer examples, but I think we're seeing increasingly the idea that disruption is coming from companies who are able to take the ideas they have and industrialize them and scale them extremely well. So the same approach in the hands of a company that has, like Toyota or Walmart or Huawei or Philips or anybody who can take a thing and make millions of them is far more, in my estimation, is far more disruptive than has far more disruptive potential in the next era of growth, particularly in the area that I'm most interested in, which is the Internet of Things and the sort of the growth of the next part of the Internet. So. I go back to use value. I think the idea of good design is it gets out of the way, and it often seems obvious in retrospect. It's often sweating a lot of details. It's in the environment we're living in now. It's about showing restraint. There's a big trend in product design around minimum viable products, or MVPs, and so being able to design minimum viable products that can get to market quickly, but that can be designed with an elegant use. That doesn't sacrifice the growth of that and the scalability of that product over time is really important. I think we get a little sloppy sometimes when we're designing digital products because we figure we can always push out more software. And when we're talking about things that are material, it's very important to be thoughtful about the physical design of something because you have to think about how that's going to change and grow over time. We're used to thinking from an engineering perspective. A lot of times the goal of product design or the goal of creating new solutions for the world is engineering driven, it's functionally driven. And a lot of times I feel like the purpose of design in that context is to make sure that we're creating a coherent narrative, that we're actually thinking about the stories that exist, that don't necessarily seem important to engineers, don't necessarily seem important to business people, but end up making a difference when it comes to the passion that people feel for things, the predilection for picking up a product and using it rather than not. And for me, that's the value of design and design thinking in this context. It's often something you can't put a value to, so it doesn't necessarily hit the business case right away. It's not something that is either difficult or interesting from an engineering perspective, but it ends up making a big difference. Frog, we're really focused on user-centered design, and we're focused in a couple different areas. We're focused on lead users, people who are not just super users, people who really grok and are really facile with an existing set of products, but we're actually thinking about people who are starting to use products, say a mobile phone or something as mundane as a vacuum cleaner, thinking about how they're using them in ways that we haven't anticipated yet. And so it's very difficult from a sustaining innovation perspective to understand what some of those things are, because we are oftentimes focused on squeezing maximum revenue out of an existing product set, or thinking about what technology we have in our R&D budget that we can give to customers, whereas in many cases they're not necessarily asking for those things. And so being sensitive to that, going out and looking at lead users, making sure you're doing the design research, as we call it, where you're going out and understanding the ethnographics of your customers and your future customers, understanding why people don't use your product today is really important. And so all these things are really part of the design thinking process and really important. And myself as a programmer for 20 years, I was not concerned with that at all. I was thinking about the use cases that were in front of me and the things that I thought were cool. And what I will tell you is that design thinking is almost the anathema of that. I think one of the things that I've learned in the last few years at Frog is that it's increasingly important for designers and engineers and architects alike to actually look at what people are doing when they're not using the thing you're creating, and a lot of times their choice to use your software is in competition with or or it's in tandem with something that you may not even know about, and so. Things that you do include functionally or from a use value perspective, you may choose to leave alone. You may keep a feature out because it's already supplied by something else. As you understand the day-to-day story from a human perspective, you may understand there are certain things you should steer clear from, even though it sounds like you're using business terms like opportunities for greater share of wallet, opportunities for influencing people's lifestyle, etc. There are a lot of things that are, we live in an abundance of devices and services and capabilities, and having the discipline to focus on the things that are of the highest value to the end human, and being able to serve that really, really well is a big part of the design process. One of the things one of the terms that I've been using is this concept of designing for the dirty world. And designing for systems that you can't completely control. I'll be hitting on that tomorrow. I'll be talking about that in detail. I'll be hitting on areas where unintended consequences of certain design decisions you make are evident. I'll be hitting on the idea that the failure state of the things that you make is actually almost as important as the smooth operation of the things that you make. And that these are all things that are not necessarily considered by people who are designing products and services today. The example that I'm going to give is about the idea that, and an axiom that we tell all our designers, which is, if you're thinking about things in the Internet of Things or in the tangible world, the comedian Mitch Hedberg years ago said that an escalator can never break; it can only become stairs. And that the same thing should be true for things we design for the Internet of Things or solutions in the tangible world, because your devices, your services, the things you put out there are going to break. And what you have to make sure is that when they do, that they don't make things worse than they were before with the thing that they replaced. So I'm going to hit on that pretty hard, and I'm going to talk about how you overcome that problem, how you design to make sure that doesn't happen, and use those 6 principles that I stumbled through earlier on. Yeah. A lot of the exciting things, a lot of the modus operandi for what we call the third wave, the Internet of Things, is to create efficiencies, being able to schedule garbage pickups much more efficiently, being able to use a lot fewer resources to get a job done. And the problem is that when those things don't work as planned, they can actually create worse states than the things that they replaced. And so what you have to be very thoughtful about is making sure that you can design systems that are resilient, that are robust enough to recognize when these things happen, and that the way you find that out is by using a process of design thinking to understand the unintended uses, the real world consequences, the things that are actually happening out in the world, rather than just thinking about engineering the perfect thing. And one of the things I'll be espousing tomorrow is this idea that you need to engineer and gather data, and then, or sorry, you need to design, you need to gather data, and then you need to adjust your design, and you need to deploy again. And the only way you can do that is if you're being thoughtful about how you created the product in the first place.